ChatGPT said, "What happens when Hollywood's most unfiltered actor steps onto the stage with late night's most calculated host? You're about to witness one of the most jaw-dropping confrontations ever aired live. A verbal chess match where egos clashed, truths collided, and civility was left in the dust. This wasn't a publicity stunt. This wasn't a promo gone wrong. This was deeply personal. And it all began with one question Stephen Colbert should have never asked. Before we dive into the full story, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below. What do you think triggered what you're about to see? The atmosphere inside the Late Show studio that Tuesday night wasn't normal. Sure, there was the usual buzz, the lights, the crowd murmuring with excitement. But underneath all of that was something tense. Backstage, Mark Wahlberg sat in the green room, mentally rehearsing the talking points for his latest film. At 52, he'd done this dance 1,000 times. From low-budget junkets in his Marky Mark days to global press tours, interviews were routine. But tonight felt different. His longtime publicist, Janet, kept glancing at her phone, her jaw a little too tight, her replies a little too clipped. The producers had been strangely vague. Just the usual stuff, they'd said. Focus on the movie. Maybe some light, banter. But Janet knew better. Vague in this town usually meant ambush. 3 doors down, Colbert wasn't prepping jokes or warming up for a friendly chat. He was reading, scrolling, studying, a curated list of articles, old headlines, and Reddit threads, all about Wahlberg, his past, the one people rarely asked about anymore. His head writer, Marcus, burst in, breaking usual protocol by skipping the knock. That alone told Stephen something was off. "We need to talk about the Wahlberg segment," Marcus said, closing the door slowly. "The execs are nervous. They think you're pushing too far. Wahlberg's been getting good press lately. The charity work, the prison reform stuff. You go hard at him now. It could look like a hit job." Stephen didn't blink. We've coddled too many people for too long. It's not about dragging the man. It's about the truth. He's been carefully curating this reformed image for decades. But has he ever really reckoned with what he did? Marcus hesitated. "But that was 30 years ago. People have moved on. He's moved on." Stephen leaned forward, voice low. "That's the problem. People forget, and we let them. The job of this desk isn't just to entertain. It's to hold a mirror up. If he's changed, he should have no problem owning it." Just then, a voice from the hallway interrupted. "Mr. Colbert, ready for final checks." Stephen rose slowly, tightening his tie. "Marcus, some conversations are overdue, and this one's 30 years late." As Stephen walked toward the stage, Marcus stayed behind, uneasy. Something about tonight wasn't just edgy television. It felt more like a reckoning. Out front, the audience had no idea what was coming. They were ready to laugh, to watch a few skits, hear about Wahlberg's latest action flick. But behind the curtain, a collision course had already been set. Wahlberg rolled his shoulders, centered himself. The plan was simple. Stay calm, stay likable, ride it out. That had always worked. He wasn't the same guy he was at 16. He'd paid his dues. He'd evolved, right? Then the music hit. The cameras rolled. The applause swelled. And 2 men took their seats across from each other. One ready to talk movies. The other ready to talk truth. What followed was more than an interview. It was a confrontation. Live, unfiltered, unforgettable. As the studio lights dimmed for the segment introduction, something in Stephen Colbert's voice triggered Mark Wahlberg's instincts. It wasn't overt, nothing the average viewer would catch. But to Mark, who'd spent decades navigating the nuances of public appearances. It felt off. The tone had shifted. Gone was the familiar warmth, replaced by something subtly sharpened, cooler, more deliberate. From behind the iconic late show desk, Stephen emerged with his usual polish, the stage lights catching the rim of his glasses, as he smiled at the crowd. He delivered his opening monologue with expert timing, jabbing at political figures and pop culture absurdities with surgical wit. The audience laughed, clapped, and settled into the rhythm. On the surface, everything was as it should be. But backstage, the longtime crew noticed what most wouldn't. Stephen wasn't just delivering jokes tonight. He was hunting. There was an intensity in his cadence, a coiled energy behind each punchline that suggested something else was coming, something heavier. As the applause died down, Stephen's expression briefly slipped, a flash of something behind the smile. Anticipation, yes, but not the eager excitement of welcoming a friend. No, this was more calculated. Predatory. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice booming with practiced clarity. "My first guest tonight is an Academy Award-nominated actor, producer, and entrepreneur. His latest film just hit #1 at the box office. Please welcome Mark Wahlberg." The audience erupted into applause. Mark stepped into the lights, waving with his signature blend of humility and swagger. He'd done this walk 100 times. Yet tonight, something felt different. The air was heavier, the lights harsher. The walk to Stephen's desk felt longer than usual, as if the floor itself was subtly slanted. Stephen rose from his seat to greet him, his smile intact. They shook hands. But as their palms met, Mark noticed it. The grip lingered just a second too long. And behind Stephen's glasses, a look, cold, assessing, flashed for a moment before vanishing into the smile. "Mark, great to have you back on the show," Stephen said, settling into his chair. "Always good to be here, Stephen. Thanks for having me," Mark replied, his Boston drawl grounding the moment with a dose of familiarity. For the first few minutes, everything unfolded according to the usual playbook. They bantered about Mark's latest film, swapped set anecdotes, and shared a few laughs. The crowd was eating it up. But under the surface, Mark could feel it. The slow tightening of something unseen. A shift in the room's energy, like a storm just beyond the horizon. Then it happened. Stephen leaned forward, his posture subtly changing. Not host to guest, but questioner to defendant. "Mark," he began, voice smooth but sharpened at the edges. "I want to shift gears for a moment, if that's okay." Mark nodded, his media instincts fully alert. "You've built an incredible career, the redemption arc, from troubled youth to respected actor, producer, businessman. It's inspiring, truly. But I want to talk about what that redemption is from." The air in the studio seemed to tighten. The audience, still smiling, was now watching more closely. Mark's expression didn't change, but inside a familiar tension flared. This wasn't going to be a puff piece. "I've always been upfront about my past," Mark said carefully. "I've made mistakes, bad ones. I've talked about them. I've worked to make things right." Stephen's smile didn't falter, but it cooled. "Right, the mistakes, the bad decisions. But I think your fans, and frankly, the public, deserve more than vague references. They deserve specifics, honesty." In the wings, Mark's publicist felt her stomach clench. This was the exact moment they'd always tried to avoid, the pivot from narrative to cross-examination. Mark inhaled slowly, meeting Stephen's eyes. "What exactly are you getting at, Stephen?" And with that, The tension that had been building all night snapped into place. The audience didn't know it yet, but they were no longer watching a celebrity interview. They were witnessing a reckoning. Mark's voice was steady, but his posture had shifted. Shoulders squared, back a little more rigid, the veneer of casual confidence giving way to something tighter. "What exactly are you getting at, Stephen?" Stephen leaned in slightly, his voice still smooth but colder now, more deliberate. "Let's talk about Boston, Mark. Let's talk about your teenage years." He paused just long enough to let the words settle. Because when you say mistakes, we're not talking about skipping school or stealing candy, are we? A tense silence rippled across the studio. The laughter had vanished. In its place was an uneasy hush that seemed to spread from the front row to the rafters. "Stephen," Mark said, his voice calm but increasingly clipped. "I've talked about my past, in interviews, in essays, in public forums. I've acknowledged that I made serious mistakes, that I hurt people, and that I've spent the better part of my life trying to make it right." "But that's just it," Stephen said, his voice sharpening. "It always sounds rehearsed, like a press release, like you're asking the world to move on, without fully owning what actually happened." Mark's jaw flexed. "Barely." "I've never minimized what I did," he replied. "I've said it over and over again. I was young, I was angry, and I did terrible things. There's no excuse for any of it. None." Stephen's tone dropped, quieter now, but with a pointed edge. "But have you really owned it?" he asked. "Because every time the subject of your past comes up, especially the hate crimes, the racial violence, it's the same polished language, and frankly, Mark, it feels hollow." The words hate crimes and racial violence landed with the force of a gavel. A few audible gasps came from the crowd. The tension in the room had thickened to a near breaking point. Mark's eyes narrowed, the pain and fury behind them impossible to miss. "You think I don't live with it every day?" he said, his voice rising ever so slightly. "You think I don't replay those moments in my head, wishing I could take them back? You think I haven't paid for it in ways you can't even begin to understand?" "I don't know, Mark," Stephen replied, now fully assuming the role of inquisitor. "Because from where I sit, it looks like someone who's mastered the art of managing a narrative, not someone who's truly reckoned with it." Mark stood, abruptly. The chair screeched behind him, spinning back a few inches. The audience jumped slightly at the sudden motion. "From where you sit," Mark repeated, his voice low and simmering. "You mean behind that desk? In your little moral high? Ground bubble, taking shots at people's lives like it's some kind of intellectual sport." Stephen blinked, visibly thrown by the outburst. "Mark, no." Mark cut in. "You want to talk about managing narratives? Let's talk about you. The guy who built a career being smug, acting like he's got the moral authority to judge everyone who sits across from him." Stephen's expression cracked for just a split second. "Mark, I think you're misunderstanding what I'm trying to do." "No, I understand perfectly," Mark said, his voice now commanding the room. "You're not asking questions. You're staging a takedown. You think humiliating someone on national television makes for good ratings. But you picked the wrong guy, and you picked the wrong day." Silence engulfed the studio. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate. All that could be heard was Mark's breathing and the faint hum of broadcast equipment. Stephen adjusted his glasses, a move that seemed more strategic than reflexive. "I think we need to step back here. I'm not trying to destroy anyone. I'm trying to have an honest conversation about accountability." Mark let out a short, humorless laugh. "Accountability?" he echoed, You ambush me with loaded questions, bring up the darkest parts of my life without warning, and call it honesty? He took a step closer to the desk. Let's talk about your accountability, Stephen, for turning your platform into a courtroom, for weaponizing shame under the banner of journalism. Stephen stayed seated, but his fingers curled slightly on the desk, as if gripping it was the only thing anchoring him in place. Mark remained standing, fists clenched at his sides. The stage lights glinted off his tense expression. This wasn't a promotional interview anymore. It wasn't even a conversation. It was a reckoning, one being televised live, without a script, and with no clear way back. You know what your problem is, Stephen? Mark's voice cut through the studio like a blade, calm but seething. No longer the voice of a guest, but of a man with nothing left to lose. You think this platform, this audience, gives you the right to play God. You think dragging someone's darkest moments into the spotlight and parading them around for entertainment is brave. But it's not. It's cruel. Stephen's mask of composure started to slip. Mark, I think you're being a little dramatic. And that right there. Mark shot back, his voice rising. That's exactly the deflection I'm talking about. Instead of engaging with what I'm actually saying, you're turning it back on me, making me the problem. You've spent the last 10 minutes questioning my integrity, my sincerity, my entire life's work, and now you want to play the victim? The studio was dead silent. Even the camera operators froze. This wasn't just uncomfortable television anymore. It was volatile. It was real. I'm not playing the victim, Stephen said, rising from behind his desk. I'm doing my job, asking the tough questions that need to be asked. Your job? Mark laughed bitterly. Your job is to entertain, to crack jokes, to ask celebrities about their next movie. You're not some moral authority, Stephen. You're not here to judge. You're here to perform. Stephen stepped out from behind his desk, now fully confronting Mark. My job is to hold people accountable, to ask the questions others are afraid to ask. No, Mark said coldly. Your job is to get ratings, to manufacture moments like this, viral clips, trending sound bites, media spectacle. You feed the machine. And if you have to destroy someone to do it, so be it. They were face to face now. The small distance between desk and chair charged like a live wire. I'm not trying to destroy you, Stephen said. I'm trying to get you to have an honest conversation about your past. Mark's voice cracked, slightly, the rawness breaking through. You want honesty? Fine. I was a kid, 16, raised in a neighborhood where hate was normal, and survival meant being harder than everyone else. I did terrible things. I hurt people. And I've spent the last 30 years trying to be better. Every damn day, Stephen, sensing an opening, pressed harder. You're still making excuses. You're blaming your environment, your upbringing. I'm not making excuses, Mark shouted, the sound booming through the studio speakers. I'm giving you context. I'm trying to show how people change, how they grow. But you... He pointed at Stephen, fury returning. You don't want growth. You don't want redemption. You want blood. Stephen flushed red. That's unfair, and you know it. Unfair? Mark stepped closer, lowering his voice to a deadly whisper. You want to talk about unfair? How about ambushing someone live on television? How about pretending to be a friend, only to stab them in the back for views? You don't want accountability. You want content. I'm not bullying anyone, Stephen insisted. You're performing. Mark cut in. You're pretending to be morally superior to people whose lives you could never understand. And I don't need your forgiveness, Stephen. I don't need your approval. And I sure as hell don't need a lecture from someone who's never had to fight for anything real. The words landed like punches. For the first time, Stephen looked shaken. Mark, I think we should both sit down and have a civil conversation. Civil? Mark laughed, cold and humorless. You lost the right to ask for civility the moment you turned this interview into an interrogation. You lost the right to ask for respect when you disrespected everything I've spent decades working toward. He turned to the audience, his voice clear, unwavering. This is what passes for journalism now. Smiling to your face, then gutting. You the moment the cameras start rolling, and you call it bravery. Stephen moved around the desk, trying desperately to salvage the show. Mark, please, let's just take a breath and try to find some common ground. Mark spun back around, his eyes blazing. Common ground? You sit in your ivory tower mocking people's pain. I've spent my life trying to atone for mine. We don't have common ground, Stephen. We don't even live in the same world. Don't do this, Stephen pleaded. Don't walk away from this conversation. Watch me, Mark said, and he walked toward the edge of the stage. Mark, running away doesn't solve anything, Stephen shouted after him. This is exactly the kind of behavior I'm talking about. Mark stopped. When he turned, his voice was low, measured, devastating. I'm not running. I'm walking away from a conversation that was never meant to be honest. You decided I was guilty before I walked on this stage. You just wanted a confession. For the cameras. He turned to the main camera. To anyone watching who's ever made mistakes, who's ever tried to change, who's worked to be better than their worst moment. Don't let people like this tell you it's not enough. Don't let them keep you chained to your past. And with that, Mark Wahlberg walked off the set of The Late Show, leaving Stephen Colbert standing alone, frozen, in front of an audience, stunned into absolute silence. The cameras lingered for a few stunned seconds, capturing the look on Stephen's face before cutting to commercial. But it was too late. The moment was already immortalized, and the internet was about to explode. So what do you think really pushed Mark over the edge? Was it Stephen's calculated ambush? Or was something deeper unraveling beneath the surface? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more jaw-dropping stories like this one. Because when Hollywood's biggest personalities collide, the fallout is always explosive.